What happens when you mix birch sap, reindeer bone, and Bronze Age optimism? Tonight we walk through pine forests into a mossy camp where firewood pops under an open cauldron, sap boils slow beside marrow, and something that might be beer, but also might be soup, is starting to smell strangely promising. Unless you're a fan of reindeer bone broth ale, you probably won't survive this taste test without blinking. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're here, drop your location and local time below. Always curious how far this old smoke drifts. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You duck beneath the branches. The air is thick with pine and peat smoke, and the scent of something boiling slow and strange pulls you forward. The fire pit glows low red coals, a few snapping flames, and over it hangs a wide, blackened cauldron, steam slipping out in twisting threads. A bundle of herbs dangles nearby. Birch bark curls beside a log. A bone, definitely not decorative, rests on a flat stone. Welcome to the brewery. The Bronze Age in what we now call Finland was a season-bound life. Cold winters, deep forests, short summers. Food was preserved, flavored, fermented because survival meant making use of everything, including sap, including bones, including yeast that no one could see, but everyone seemed to believe in. Tonight, the brewers have begun their work. They've gathered the birch sap tapped in early spring when the trees release their sweet, pale lifeblood. They've added herbs, possibly juniper sweet gale or meadow sweet, something to make it sharp, something to keep the spirits interested. Then the bones go in. A real archaeological fact. Several Bronze Age ceramic vessels from Northern Europe contain residue consistent with marrow fat and honey-fermented starches. The evidence isn't clear-cut, but it points to brewing methods that combined ingredients in ways that were both culinary and ceremonial. And tonight, you watch one of those brews come to life. A woman stirs with an antler-handled ladle, the handle dark from use. She hums under her breath. Soft, melodic, maybe improvised, or maybe inherited. Her feet shift in moss. The pot bubbles gently. Nearby, two men are carving a wooden tap plug shaped to fit into the rim of a clay storage jar, its surface blackened from coals with faint scratches that might be decoration or might just be the story of someone's fingernail slipping. A child adds more pine bark to the fire, grinning as the smoke rises. The process isn't rushed. Brewing takes time. It takes fire. It takes patience with things that cannot be rushed, fermentation conversation, and convincing a deer bone to release its flavor without becoming offensive. The scent now is layered sap, sweetness, fatty broth, herbs, smoke. You try to place it. It doesn't smell like beer. It smells like a forest dreaming of beer. A quirky tidbit: researchers have debated whether some Bronze Age brews were intentionally soured, left to ferment with wild yeast, or open to airborne bacteria producing drinks closer to modern kvass or sour mead than what we'd think of as ale. This one, hard to say. You lean over the pot, Steam fogs your face. There's definitely sap, definitely marrow, and something else you can't name, sharp metallic, and just a little like the inside of a tree. You watch as the brewers lift the cauldron from the flame and pour it through woven bark and moss into a clay vat. The liquid is golden, cloudy hot. Froth gathers at the edges. A splash hits the earth. Someone murmurs a word that sounds like apology. Researchers still debate whether this drink was ritual nourishment or both. Was it poured on graves, shared at weddings, offered to gods before hunts? The evidence is scattered. Potsherds char carbon traces. No written record. Only bone and sap, and tradition handed from hand to hand. But as you stand there now, watching steam rise beneath the birches, it's clear this isn't just sustenance. It's a ceremony. The first sip will wait until dawn. For now, the pot is rinsed. The fire covered the herbs hung to dry. The air cools. Frogs begin to call from the bog nearby. You sit back on a flat stone heartbeat, slowing lungs full of damp pine and something sweet. And as the forest settles, so does the brew. The sky is deepening to pewter now, with streaks of twilight dripping down behind the treetops like spilled sap. The fire is mostly ash, glowing faintly, and the brewing pot has been dragged aside to cool. A few drops still cling to its rim, thick, golden, a little sticky. You reach out and touch one with the tip of your finger. It smells like sweetness and smoke, like birchwood soaked in broth, like beer, if beer had been raised in the forest by moss and marrow. So what exactly is in this pot? Well, probably a tooth, because Bronze Age Finnish brewing was not for the faint of palate. Let's begin with what we're relatively sure of birch sap. Tapped in early spring, just as the frost releases its grip, sap was a dependable sugar-rich liquid. Clear and sweet, it could be consumed fresh or left to ferment. If you've ever tasted birch sap that's been left for a day too long in the sun, you'll know fermentation starts fast. Next comes honey in some brews. Not always, and not in vast quantities. It was precious, but even a little could tip the fermentation toward a light mead-like ale. Then there were the starches, oats, barley, maybe even bits of mashed tuber. We don't have direct evidence of grain agriculture in Bronze Age Finland at this scale, but charred mash in vessels suggests some kind of fermentation fuel was going in the pot. Now things get interesting. A mainstream fact, archaeological residue analysis from Bronze and Iron Age ceramics across the Nordic region has found traces of animal fat, marrow lipids, and collagen proteins, especially in vessels with evidence of heating. In short, bones were in the beer, and not just floating like soup stock. They were cracked, boiled, and bled of flavor. Because bones meant sustenance, but they also meant spirit. You weren't just drinking calories, you were drinking animal memory. The reindeer, the elk, the bear. Their essence softened into the pot. Their stories dissolved into the brew. You picture it now, a huge flat femur bone blackened at the end, dropped into hot sap and rolling bubbles. The marrow seeps out slowly, fat curling like cream into the liquid. Someone leans over to sniff. Someone else adds pine needles. Was it good? Who's to say? A quirky tidbit in some Baltic and Sami traditions, marrow was considered a sacred food, one that could carry dreams or fuel rituals or help you see across the veil during trance. If your brew carried marrow, it wasn't just nourishment. It was navigation. And yes, there were herbs. Birch bark might go in not much, but enough for bitterness. Meadow sweet or bog myrtle for tang and aroma. Juniper, too, sometimes added by the handful to ward off illness or unwanted spirits. And if something extra fell in, say, a cracked tooth from last year's deer skull, you left it, for luck, or for fear of removing it and upsetting the balance. Researchers still debate whether the inclusion of bone was ritual accident or flavor-based necessity. Did they add it to thicken the drink, to strengthen it, or simply because waste was dangerous in a world where every part of the animal had meaning? You watch the brew settle in its vat. It's cloudy now, layered. Froth clings to the rim. Bits of bark and marrow float near the surface, casting tiny shadows in the lamplight. No one drinks yet. There's still a waiting period overnight, maybe longer. Fermentation comes slowly, even when wild yeast is eager. The vat will be covered, placed in the shade of a birch tree, weighted with a stone that smells faintly of moss and meat. And when it's ready, the first pour goes to the earth. A sip dribbled onto the soil. Maybe for the gods. Maybe for the ancestors. Maybe just to make sure the batch doesn't offend whoever's listening. Because there's always someone listening. You lean back now, licking the last of the sap-marred froth from your finger. It tastes odd. A little sour. A little sweet. A little like boiled bone tea left in a birch cup too long. But strangely, it works. And the more you think about it, the more you realize this drink isn't designed for pleasure. It's designed for connection. To the tree, to the herd, to the breath of the fire, to the marrow that softens in the heat and becomes something else. So you smile, and you wait for the first sip. Morning breaks slow and pale through the trees, filtered in long bars of mist and birdsong. The fire has been banked. The ashes are cold. But just beyond the circle of stones, the brewing pot still waits, now cooler, thicker, and beginning to hum with the quiet breath of wild fermentation. It's sap season, and that means the birches are waking. You walk the tree line now, feet soft in lichen and wet needles. Birch trunks stand pale and dappled like watchful sentries. Their bark peels in long curls. Their roots drink from the soggy spring earth. And inside, beneath the bark, the sap is moving. Because in Bronze Age, Finland birch sap wasn't just a drink, it was a seasonal threshold. A mainstream fact, birch sap rises in early spring just after the thaw. It's collected by tapping a shallow hole in the bark, inserting a reed or hollow twig, and letting the clear liquid drip into a vessel. The sap is rich in sugar minerals and micronutrients, nature's sweet, watery tonic. But it doesn't last long. The flow only lasts a few weeks, and once the leaves emerge, the sap turns bitter. So for those few precious days each year, the trees offer their gift, and the brewers gather with wooden buckets, clay bowls, hollow horns, or anything else that could catch a drip. You pause now beneath a particularly wide birch. A notch has been cut near its base, careful shallow like a whisper rather than a wound. A little reed is wedged into the cut, and a faint tap, tap, tap sounds from the vessel below. A child crouches nearby watching the drops. He dips a finger into the sap and licks it, then laughs. You crouch too and taste. It's sweet, gently so, like rainwater that's been thinking about honey. No bite, no sting, just a soft, cold lightness that spreads across your tongue and disappears. Perfect for brewing. A quirky tidbit in some Sami and Karelian traditions, birch sap was used in naming ceremonies, poured into the soil, smeared on a child's lips, or offered in a horn cup to bless a journey. Sap wasn't just refreshment, it was promise. And so Bronze Age brewers saw sap season as more than practical. It was symbolic, a time of shift, of opening, the earth softening, the animals stirring, the last of the ice breaking from the lakes, and sap, like a river inside the trees, carried this transformation into their bodies, into their beer. Researchers still debate how early fermentation began in this region. While evidence of organized brewing doesn't appear until the Iron Age in much of Northern Europe, residue from earlier periods, including Bronze Age sites, suggest some form of fermentation was happening well before writing caught up. Maybe by accident, maybe by memory. But once you've tasted sap that's gone a little wild on its own, it's easy to understand how the process might have started. A bowl left out too long, a vessel forgotten in the shade, the faint fizz on the surface, the sour, sweet scent of something just beginning to transform. You watch now as a woman pours fresh sap into the cooled brew vat, stirring gently. Steam no longer rises, but small bubbles gather near the rim, early signs of life. The wild yeast has woken. It doesn't need help, just warmth, time, and maybe a little respect. A handful of spruce twigs is dropped into the liquid, followed by a pinch of sun-dried juniper berries crushed beneath a stone. Flavor, yes, but also warding. Because in the old world, birch was protection. It kept evil away. It summoned good weather. It honored the dead. And it asked the land for permission. You remember a story told by a local elder in Karelia. If you cut into a birch without asking, the tree would bleed for nothing, and your next 3 brews would sour. The only way to fix it: sleep beside the tree for 3 nights. Apologize, and plant another in return. No one likes a stingy brewer. The pot now steams slightly again, not from fire, but from heat deep in the mixture, as fermentation begins to turn sugars to froth. The bone has sunk low like a dream beneath the surface. The sap swirls slow and golden. It smells alive now. Sweet, wild, a little dangerous. You lean in close, and for a moment you swear the brew is breathing. You sit back. You close your eyes. The forest shifts around you, not fast, not loud, just the slow exhale of spring finally arriving. Sap flows, the brew swells, and somewhere in the heart of it all, the first bubbles rise to the surface and pop soft as a footstep in the moss. The brew is bubbling now, soft and steady with a rhythm that feels almost intentional. You lean close and listen. It's not quite boiling, no flames have touched it in hours, but it moves with warmth, with breath, with purpose, because this isn't just sap and herbs anymore. This is bone broth beer in the making, and that's when someone tosses another rib into the pot. Yes, another one. Tonight you follow the strange, marrow-rich road of Bronze Age brewing that didn't stop at flowers and honey, but went all the way into bone ash and reindeer spine. A mainstream fact residue analysis on Bronze Age ceramics in the Nordic and Baltic regions shows repeated traces of animal lipids, particularly bone-derived fats. These weren't just soup pots. They were likely multifunctional cauldrons, sometimes used for stew, sometimes for beer, and sometimes apparently for both at once. You watch now as a set of boiled reindeer bones, stripped of meat but still faintly greasy, are arranged near the pot. Some go in. Others are placed to the side. One has been hollowed, slightly carved into a ladle, its handle wrapped with sinew and softened birch bark. Another is being used to stir the brew. A third someone's poking it into the earth upright like a marker. You're starting to suspect this is less of a recipe and more of a summoning. A quirky tidbit in old Finnish and Sami stories' reindeer bones could hold memory. If boiled properly and not broken, the bones remembered the herds, and placing them in the earth could help guide lost animals or lost spirits home. So adding them to the brew, it might flavor the drink, or it might flavor the drinker. And there's more. The bones aren't just dropped in whole. Some are burned first charred black in the fire, then scraped clean, then soaked again. One is cracked lengthwise to release the marrow, and the broth that follows is ladled directly into the fermentation pot. It's greasy, cloudy, somehow both rich and hollow. It swirls with sap and froth and forest. Researchers still debate the purpose of this practice. Was the bone for nutrition to create a stronger, fattier, beer-like soup in cold seasons? Or was it for ritual to honor the animal, preserve its essence, or forge a connection between drinker and prey? Or perhaps, as is so often the case in the ancient North, it was both. You sit by the fire pit, watching the pot settle after its most recent addition. A thin layer of fat glistens on top. Not enough to be alarming, just enough to remind you that something with a skeleton helped make this possible. Someone nearby begins scraping marrow out of another bone, not for the brew this time, but for a side dish. The paste is mixed with dried berries, a touch of salt, and wrapped in birch bark to warm over the embers. You realize this entire process, brew and food, isn't separate. It's a feast forming, slowly, softly, with fire and patience and strange ingredients that never appear in your average modern ale. And then the brewer speaks softly but clearly. They say the drink isn't ready yet, not until the bone sinks. You glance at the pot. The largest rib floats just beneath the surface, visible beneath a layer of cloudy sweetness. The surface is frothing, now small bubbles catching the edges. A pine cone bobs past like a tiny boat trying its luck. And slowly, like a promise being kept, the bone begins to sink. You don't know if it's real science or a trick of density or just the weight of marrow giving way. But the moment it disappears, the brewer nods, and the pot is covered. A flat stone goes on top. A ring of carved sticks surrounds it. The bone ladle is laid across the rim like a handle for a door that shouldn't be opened too soon. You feel the shift. The brew is fermenting now, and it's no longer a broth. It's a becoming. You lean back, pressing your spine into a patch of sun-warmed moss. The birds are quiet. The trees lean in. Everything feels held in this in-between moment between soup and beer, between forest and fire, between what's remembered and what's almost forgotten. And somewhere in that pot, the reindeer bone floats deeper, bringing its story with it. The sun has nearly vanished now, sliding behind the pines like it's stepping politely out of the story. You sit near the brew vat, wrapped in the rising scent of wood ash, and something gently fermenting, something that used to be birch sap, and is now becoming something else. The lid is still sealed. The bone has sunk. And all around you the signs of brewing remain: ceramic pots blackened by flame-charred crusts at the edges, and thick, ridged vessels that once held mash, but now hold memory. Tonight we wander through the archaeology of ancient brewing, the fragments, the footprints, and the frothy residue left behind. You move slowly now, feet crunching across a patch of exposed clay. Someone has built a stone ring kiln wide enough to nestle a large brewing pot. Beside it lies a flat ceramic disc cracked in half. The inside is blackened. You run a finger across the edge. It crumbles. That's the charred mash. A mainstream fact: archaeologists have found Bronze Age pots in Finland and surrounding regions with carbonized organic residues, bits of char fat starch, and even yeast cake traces baked into the ceramic. It's not just cooking, it's fermentation by fire. Some pots are wide-mouthed and squat, designed for boiling. Others are tall and narrow, possibly for storage. But all of them have one thing in common: they're stained with intent. You kneel by one now. Its surface is etched not with art, not quite, but with finger marks. Maybe a design, maybe just grip. The rim is chipped. The base is rounded, made for cradling in ash or sand. Inside, a dark crust, sweet-smelling. You break off a flake, and it smells like caramelized bark smoke and porridge, maybe oat mash, maybe tree starch, maybe a Bronze Age breakfast gone slightly sideways. A quirky tidbit: at least one pot found in a Finnish bog showed signs of repeated heating and scalding, suggesting it may have been used to start fermentation batches like a prehistoric sourdough mother, but frothier and potentially explosive. That brings us to the other part of brewing archaeology: what went wrong. Some vessels show cracks bubbling or ruptures, evidence that fermentation pressure built and split the pot. Others contain soot on the inside, likely from boiling too hot or forgetting to stir while arguing about which cousin let the last batch go flat. You watch now as one of the brewers lifts a pot with care, pours a slosh of yesterday's mash into a pit, and rinses the vessel with hot water and a pine branch. The pine acts as a scrubber. The scent is fresh, sharp, and antiseptic. And just like that, the tools reset. Brewing wasn't just a one-off event, it was routine. A cycle. You brewed what the season gave you: sap in spring berries in summer, root mash in fall. The pots told the story not just of one brew, but of dozens. You glance around the circle, 5 vessels, all slightly different. One is cracked and filled with sand. One is sealed with bark and pitch. One is still warm from the fire. They sit like siblings, like secrets. Researchers still debate whether these vessels were communal property, personal gear, or tied to stata. Were they passed down, assigned, stolen during raids? One theory suggests that certain pot shapes correlate with female burial sites, hinting that women may have led the brewing. Another argues that the brewers were also ritual leaders, part spiritual, part culinary, part very tired. You sit beside the largest pot. Its side is scratched with something, maybe a tally, maybe a rune, maybe just the mark of someone stirring too hard after one too many tastes. Whatever it is, it remains. That's the nature of this kind of archaeology. You're not holding texts or tools with labels. You're holding the results of forgotten hands doing very deliberate work. Brewing wasn't loud. It didn't leave monuments, but it left crusts. And sometimes crusts are the best kind of clue. You lean in. The smell from the lidded brew is deeper now. Still sweet, but heavier, rooted. Like the forest is starting to answer. The fire's embers pulse low and red, like the heart of the forest slowing down for sleep. Shadows stretch from tree to tree, long and soft, as the first stars blink into place overhead. Somewhere nearby, an owl calls, once brief and unbothered, and beside you, the brew ferments in silence. But the silence is full of stories, because this drink with its birch sap and bones and bubbling edge isn't just chemistry. It's myth. It's memory wrapped in froth. And the deeper you breathe it in, the more you realize this isn't just beer. It's belief in a bowl. Tonight you sip on the folklore that fermented right alongside the ale. A mainstream fact. Bronze Age and early Iron Age people in Northern Europe lived in a landscape thick with animism. The belief that animals, trees, stones, and rivers all had spirits, intentions, and preferences. To brew, to boil, to drink, all of it had spiritual weight. So when birch sap ran in spring, that wasn't just biology. It was a signal. The birch was waking, and it brought the gods with it. You walk softly now to the edge of a small clearing where the brewers have placed a carved wooden idol beside the brewing vat. It's simple, just a head and shoulders, maybe reindeer bone, maybe birch burl. Its face is smooth, its eyes are hollowed, its mouth is just a line, but it's watching. Offerings rest at its base. Pine cones, dried berries, a little horn cup with a few drops of froth. You kneel as others have before you and press your palm to the ground, just to say, "I see you seeing me." A quirky tidbit in some Finnish and Karelian legends, the forest spirits could be lured or appeased with drink. A good brew could make a hunt successful, protect a birth, or bless a journey. But a spoiled one that could sour the whole season. It's said that you should never mock your own brew, even if it tastes like birch-flavored disaster. You rise and walk to the brew vat. Steam no longer rises from it. The lid stays on. But the smell, it has deepened. Gone is the sweet sap and marrow soup. In its place, earth yeast and something lightly floral. And behind it, someone begins to sing. Not loudly, just enough. A low melody, no words, but the rhythm is steady. It matches the beat of your pulse. It rises and falls like breath through pine needles. It's a brew song, meant to keep the pot from turning, meant to stir the yeast with tone, not touch. Researchers still debate the function of these songs. Were they spells? Instructions? Just something to pass the time? Some ethnographic accounts link chanting to fermentation, the belief that certain tones or words help the brew wake up or avoid mischief. One tale claims that jealous spirits spoil silent pots, but leave singing ones alone. So they sing, and the beer listens. You close your eyes now and feel it a sort of echo, like the brew itself is tuning to the note. The lid shifts slightly as a bubble pops beneath it. Was that the wind or something answering back? The myths are full of creatures tied to brewing spirit, women of the marsh who taste the froth to test its courage. Stone watchers who remember every batch made near their roots. And of course the bone drinkers' ghosts who sniff the steam and pass judgment without ever appearing. The line between flavor and fate was thin. And in some stories only certain people could brew. Not for lack of knowledge, but for lack of permission. One tale warns of a man who brewed with sap taken from a cursed grove. His beer turned black, his guests fell ill, and his goat ran backwards for 3 weeks. A reminder, never ignore where your birch stands. The singing softens, the air cools, and the brew breathes. You can feel it now, beneath the lid. Frothing gently, not just with yeast, but with old intentions. From the marrow, from the bark, from the stories whispered into its steam. You place your hand on the side of the pot. It's warm, alive, familiar. And just for a moment, it feels like the brew is holding you. The stars have settled now, anchored above the treetops, like frost pinned to the sky. The clearing glows with the faint shimmer of peat embers, and in the distance a reindeer bell jingles once, then falls quiet. Somewhere in the moss, something small snuffles, then scurries away. And beside the fire, the brew waits. Tonight, we follow the shape of a creature both sacred and practical. The reindeer whose bones have flavored this beer, whose hide may wrap the brewer's shoulders, and whose antlers might stir the froth like spoons carved by gods. Because in the Bronze Age North, the reindeer was everything. A mainstream fact, reindeer were central to many northern Eurasian cultures, not only as a source of food, bone, and hide, but also as carriers of myth and memory. In early Finnish and Sami societies, the reindeer was both larder and symbol, sustaining, and sacred, chaste, and revered. Tonight, its marrow is in the pot. But that's not where the story ends. You watch now as one of the brewers unwraps a bundle of antler slivers, each carved into soft curves. These are tools, stirrers, ladles, paddles. The tips are darkened, stained with resin and use. One has small runes scratched into it. Another is bound with red thread. They are not ordinary utensils. They are ritual implements. One is dipped into the brew and stirred gently. The froth turns cloudy and thick. A ring of bubbles gathers around the antler. Someone murmurs something soft, fast a word meant only for the pot. A quirky tidbit in Sami oral tradition antlers were believed to hold memory. If you carved into the wrong part of a fallen rack, the spirits would slip sideways and the brew would sour, but the right carving that could call ancestors, and so the brewer stirs with care. The pot responds, bubbling slightly louder, as if agreeing. You sit beside a flat rock, where 2 reindeer hooves rest, cleaned, dried, polished. Not just leftover parts, but tools in their own right. One was likely used to scoop ash. The other may be a cap for a fermentation jar. Its base is marked with 5 dots, possibly decorative, possibly a signature. The reindeer, it seems, touched every part of the brew. Its bones boiled for marrow, added for flavor. Its hide used to seal or wrap vessels. Its antlers turned into stirring rods or drinking horns. Its hooves turned into caps, spoons, or maybe charms. Researchers still puzzle over this full integration. Was it out of necessity, nothing wasted, or was the reindeer so revered that brewing without it was unthinkable? Some suggest it may have symbolized seasonal change, a herd creature tied to migration fertility, the turning of the year. Others say it was a guide animal, helping carry the spirit through altered states, especially when drink was involved. One old tale speaks of a man who drank too deeply from a birch beer horn carved from antler. He fell asleep in a snowbank and dreamed of running with reindeer over frozen lakes, his breath misting in time with the stars. When he woke, he could track elk with his eyes closed. No one asked if he tried again. You glance into the pot. The froth has changed, now ringed with fat droplets from the bone, but lighter in color. It smells like sap and meat and smoke and memory. A small layer of bubbles clings to the antler stirrer. The brewer taps it twice on the rim. Done for now. And as the antler is set aside, another tool is brought forward, a drinking horn carved not from reindeer, but from a younger elk. Decorated with thin metal banding, faint scratch marks, and a single inlaid bead of amber. A token, perhaps. a gift, a warning. The horn is filled not to the brim, but enough to offer. Not to drink. Not yet. The brewer walks it to the edge of the clearing where the trees grow thick and the ground dips into a hollow. There, the horn is raised. A word is spoken, and the contents are poured into the earth, not splashed, not spilled, poured. You don't need to ask what for. The reindeer's breath is still in the brew, the trees remember the hunt, and the spirits, whatever they are, were watching from the first stir. The offering sinks into the moss. The horn returns now empty, and the pot keeps bubbling. The forest grows quieter now, less the hush of nightfall, more the thick velvet silence that arrives when everything's listening. Even the fire seems cautious, its glow low and watchful, reflecting faintly in the sheen of the brewing pot. And inside that pot, the beer stirs itself. Not by magic, not quite, but by a series of choices so peculiar, so wonderfully old, they almost feel like spells. Because tonight, we enter the brew hut and discover how fire ash, pine needles, and moss became the unsung heroes of Bronze Age fermentation. You duck into a small, hide-covered shelter nestled into the earth. The air inside is heavy with yeast smoke and sap. There's a thick scent of warm bark and old marrow, and something faintly medicinal. The brewers are working quietly here, tending ash beds, adjusting stone lids, humming now and then. The brew, you realize, isn't just happening over fire. It's happening in stages and across materials. A mainstream fact fermentation, particularly in prehistoric societies, often relied on natural sources of wild yeast temperature control via insulation and ingredients we'd never think of today, like wood ash, which raises pH, and may have helped control unwanted bacteria. In one corner, a flat bed of white ash and pine needles has been layered beneath a sealed pot. The brewer opens it with care. Steam escapes. Inside, a mix of leftover birch sap, charred herbs, and possibly ground root mash is gently warming, not boiling, just enough to wake the yeast, as one old proverb translated badly and fondly suggests. And beside it, a moss mat laid out carefully like a drying cloth. You crouch closer and see it's not for decoration. It's for filtering. A quirky tidbit. Moss, particularly peat moss, was sometimes used in ancient brewing to strain out mash solids, clarify liquids, and even store starter cultures. Its antimicrobial properties and absorbency made it a kind of soft, forest-grown cheesecloth. Here, it's been placed over a shallow ceramic bowl. The brewer pours a ladleful of warm beer mash through the moss. The liquid runs slow, clear, golden. The solids stay behind, clinging to the fibers like sleepy oats and crushed herbs. You reach out and touch the edge. It's damp, sticky, smells faintly of juniper and toast. Not a bad combination. On the far wall, slabs of birch bark are propped up, each coated with thin, drying layers of sap yeast slurry. You realize what they're doing, they're making starters. This is yeast catching. Leave birch sap in the open air, and wild yeast will find it. It starts to bubble, froth, transform. Capture that froth, smear it onto bark, dry it near the fire, store it in bundles of grass or folded hide. You've made the first sourdough of beer. Researchers still debate whether Bronze Age brewers understood yeast in the modern sense, but they didn't need to name it. They knew what worked. They knew which pots fermented faster, which mosses soured, which breezes turned brew into vinegar, and which ones made it sing. In the center of the hut, a deep stone bowl is filled with a mixture of pine ash and water, an ancient lye bath possibly used to clean tools or neutralize overly sour batches. One brewer dips an antler ladle into it, swirls it, and then leaves it to rest on a folded hide. You see now that every step, every stir, every temperature shift, every covering isn't just improvisation. It's ritualized knowledge, passed down not on scrolls but through gestures, timing, and taste. Taste. You're curious now. A horn ladle is passed around half full, the froth just settled. The beer is still warm, lightly fermented. Someone hands it to you. You take a sip and pause. It's not sweet, exactly. Not sharp, either. It tastes like sap and memory, like herbs caught in bark, like a forest pressed into a single gulp. There's a hint of smoke, a whisper of bone, and something wild on the edge of sour yeast in mid-thought. It's the kind of drink that asks you to slow down. You hand the horn back, and someone tosses a sprig of pine into the coals, a small thank you. Researchers still argue about the balance of science and magic in these practices. Was moss used because it filtered well, or because it grew where the gods were quiet as ash for sterilization or sanctity? Probably both, because the forest teaches in layers, and so does beer. You step outside now. The air is cold, crisp, filled with the soft scent of pine smoke and ferment. The hut behind you glows faintly. Inside, the brewers hum again, and the moss waits for the next pour. And you exhale, the taste still on your tongue, and the forest in your lungs. You walk back toward the main clearing, the moss springy beneath your feet, the smell of warm birch and half-fermented dreams clinging to your hair. The brew sits quietly in its pot now, froth low, the bubbles lazy. You sit beside it, half drowsy, fully mesmerized. And then someone laughs. Not loud, just a soft, shoulder-shaking chuckle from one of the brewers as he reaches into a nearby pot and pulls out something mushy, grayish, and probably not supposed to look like that. It flops. Someone else groans. Tonight we ask a question. Scholars whisper into their sampling trays and pottery fragments. Was this sacred beer? Or just an ancient party accident? A mainstream fact. Bronze Age fermentation practices are notoriously hard to classify as purely ritual or purely practical. The evidence pot's pit's carbon residue and crusted mash suggests both structured ceremonies and the occasional brewing disaster. And you're watching one now. The pot they're scooping from had too much oat mash, not enough sap, and was left a little too close to the fire. The result: A lumpy porridge meets ale hybrid that smells faintly of glue and sorrow. You lean over and sniff. Yep, that's regret in a bowl, but no one throws it away. Instead, it's scooped into bark troughs offered to the pigs or used to thicken stew. Waste isn't part of the Bronze Age vocabulary, not when your winters are 8 months long and the sap only runs for 3 weeks. Still, someone ties a bit of twine around the pot's rim, a quiet sign to self do not repeat. A quirky tidbit. One archaeological site in southern Finland revealed a cracked pot buried upright in a pit filled with scorched mash residue. It had been carefully sealed with turf and stone. One theory: a burial for a failed brew. A brewing shame grave. Respectful but very clear. Never speak of this again. You glance around the circle. There's still reverence here. Still song. Still horn cups passed with careful hands. But there's also laughter. Someone tries to skim foam with a carved ladle and splashes half of it onto their tunic and lips on a puddle of sap. A third tries to pronounce the old name for the brew and ends up sneezing into the fire. You realize this isn't just ritual, it's life. And researchers still debate which came first, the ceremony or the celebration. Was beer made for sacred rites, and people just enjoyed the leftovers? Or was it made for feasting and spiritual meaning, was stirred in later like herbs added to an already frothy batch? One school of thought says brewing was gendered, often tied to women or community elders who managed the knowledge and passed it down. Another suggests brewing was seasonal magic, a role taken up by whomever had the time, the touch, or the patience to listen to yeast. You watch now as someone stands and raises a horn, not in prayer, not in formality, but to toast the last exploded oat pot. A murmur of laughter follows. A second horn is raised. A third. The brewer bows deeply, and someone mutters, "At least it didn't catch fire this time." That gets a cheer. You see now that ritual and ridiculousness are not separate. The same pot that was blessed at dawn can be mocked by twilight. The same song that summoned spirits can be repurposed as a drinking tune. The sacred isn't diminished. It just fizzes differently. You sip from your horn again carefully. This batch is good. Sweet. Sharp. It tastes like everything you've seen bone bark moss mishap. You lean back, stretch your legs, and think of all the rituals that probably began like this, with best intentions and lumpy outcomes. With fire too hot or sap too old, with someone adding the magic herb just a touch too generously, and waking up convinced a pine tree was judging them. And honestly, it probably was. You close your eyes now, belly warm, mind swirling. There are still more brews to try, more myths to sip, and at least one pot that might not survive the night intact. But for now, you rest your hand on the moss. Feel the earth, smell the ferment, and know that sacred or silly, the brew is always worth it. The fire is glowing again, just a little brighter now, coaxed into life for the final boil, the last stir. You sit with your knees drawn up, horn cup, resting beside you in the moss, eyes half-lidded, as the forest leans in close. The trees creak softly. Somewhere nearby, a raven rustles its wings and decides not to comment. And now it's time to talk about the people who've been stirring this pot since the beginning. Not just hands, roles. Because Bronze Age brewing wasn't just about sap and bone and fire, it was about who brewed and why. A mainstream fact. Archaeological and ethnographic studies suggest that brewing in early societies, especially in the North, was often a specialized role. Not necessarily religious in the formal sense, but deeply respected. Brewing required knowledge, timing, patience, and a very good nose. Tonight you watch a woman lift the pot's lid, sniff gently, and smile. She's older. Her fingers are stained from bark and berries. Her sleeves are patched with old burn marks. She wears a necklace made of small antler shards. One is carved with a spiral. She dips her ladle, antler-handled of course, and fills a fresh horn. Not for herself, for the fire. She pours a small splash into the coals. It hisses, sizzles, then fades. Steam curls upward. A nod of thanks. Or maybe a warning, behave. We remember. A younger brewer takes her place, learning the stir, the feel of the brew, the way to judge by sound and smell alone. No timers, no thermometers. Just intuition passed through generations like bread starters and weather superstitions. Researchers still debate whether brewing was gendered. Some evidence suggests women oversaw most domestic fermentation. In other sites, men buried with brewing gear suggest ritual specialization, a role that straddled both feasting and funeral rites. The truth, likely both. Because brewing wasn't just food. It was communal memory. You glance around the camp. One person tends the fire. One watches the fermentation vessel. One hums always the same three-note song again and again. A child gathers moss for filtering. An elder checks the bone ladles for cracks. Each has a part, a place, a rhythm. You start to realize brewing is less about recipes and more about roles repeated into habit. A quirky tidbit in one early Baltic village site, archaeologists uncovered a circle of stones around a central pot with bits of bone and burnt grass interspersed. The theory, a permanent brewing station, possibly with assigned spaces for each participant, like a circular dance of yeast and flame. You picture it now, each step choreographed, each person a note in a slow, sacred song. And the brew, a kind of chorus, one that sings in silence and froth. Someone hands you a new cup, this one carved from birch burl, rough on the outside, smooth on the lip. The drink is different, stronger, darker. You sip. It tastes like smoke sap and memory, like everything you've seen warmed and settled. The brewer beside you doesn't speak, but she watches. She's checking your reaction. You nod. She smiles. Not everyone gets it. Some visitors gag. Some try to add salt. One man once dropped a stone into the pot and claimed it would calm the yeast. He was politely asked to leave. Forever. Because this brew isn't for show. It's a living record. It remembers who stirred it, who blessed it, who laughed too loudly, and who kept their mouth shut until the first horn was passed. And tonight, you're part of that record. You take another sip. The brewer nods again, slightly more approving this time, and returns to her fire. The brew will rest overnight now, covered with moss, lulled with song, stirred only by dreams. And by morning, it'll be ready to be shared. You wrap your cloak tighter, stretch your legs, and lean back into the moss. You're not a visitor anymore. You're part of the circle. You wake slowly with moss at your back, the scent of birch smoke in your hair, and a faintly sour aftertaste on your tongue that says, yes, that was real. Morning has arrived, not with a bang, but with a low fog and a few sleepy bird chirps. Someone has rekindled the fire. The pot still simmers. The brew has darkened. And you're still thinking about last night's cup. Or maybe you're trying to forget it. Because today, we're going to talk about the brew that didn't make it. The one that foamed over, exploded, or just gave up. Because while Bronze Age brewing was sacred, seasonal, and beautifully strange, it also sometimes went completely wrong. And yes, there's evidence. A mainstream fact across multiple Nordic and Baltic sites, archaeologists have uncovered cracked ceramic vessels, scorched interiors, and in one case, a fire-blackened pit filled with charred oat residue. These weren't ritual fires. These were brew day blunders. You sit now beside one such pot, half-buried, split down the middle. Its interior is glazed with the telltale mark of a sugar-rich mixture that got too hot too fast, a black sticky ring just above the midpoint. One brewer walks past and mutters something under their breath. You don't catch the words, but the tone. Not again. You grin. Because this wasn't just a once-in-a-century slip. Brewing, no matter how mystical, was messy. You had grain that wouldn't mash, sap that went sour, froth that climbed out of the pot like it had somewhere better to be, ladles that broke mid-stir, ash that flavored everything just slightly too much like campfire regret. A quirky tidbit one. Sami folktale describes a beer curse where a man accidentally over-ferments his batch and upon drinking it dreams he's chased by angry otters. When he wakes up, he swears off brewing forever and takes up bark weaving instead. You watch now as a brewer cautiously uncovers another pot, this one buried overnight in a pit lined with warm stones. She sniffs, pauses, then sighs. Too sour, not undrinkable, just not right. It happens, and the solution, dilute it, sweeten it, give it to someone with stronger teeth and lower standards, or if it's truly bad, offer it to the bog. You walk with her as she carries the pot to the edge of the clearing. A small, peat-darkened pool waits there, still deep and deeply unimpressed. She kneels, dips her hand into the water, then pours the contents slowly, respectfully. You don't dump beer into the earth without asking first. And the bog accepts it with a soft splash. Researchers still debate whether this kind of offering was ritual disposal or just a way to keep the smell down. But when you see the way she bows her head, touches the water, and whispers a word you don't know, you start to lean toward ritual. Because every part of the process had stakes. Every pot mattered. And some of them, well, Some exploded. You overhear two brewers now discussing last season's oat debacle. Someone added too much root powder. Someone else left the lid on too long. Result: foam up to the rafters, a cracked pot, and a stain in the brewing hut that still smells like boiled socks. It happens. They laugh about it now. But in the moment, that probably stung. Because beer was effort. Beer was memory. Beer was work. And when it went wrong, it didn't just waste ingredients, it risked the story tied to that batch. You turn your eyes to the main pot now. This one. It's still perfect. The foam is low. The scent is rich. There's a layer of froth that looks almost gold in the sunlight. Not every brew fails. Some are just right. And you start to see why they keep going batch after batch through mishaps and moss fires and horn cups knocked over by clumsy elbows. Because when it works, it tastes like the forest is toasting you back. You sip. The flavor has mellowed overnight. Deeper. Earthier. The bone and bark have blended into something that isn't quite ale, isn't quite soup, and isn't anything you've ever tasted in your waking life. You lean back. You smile. And somewhere deep in the bog, another old pot settles quietly into the earth, cracked, empty, honored. Because even a failed brew has its place. Mist curls low over the clearing, now wrapping around the brewing circle like a lazy, damp blanket. The fire has quieted to a coal bed hum. You hear the creak of leather, the splash of liquid, the soft thunk of antler against wood, as the brewers fill the first true cups of the season's best batch. But before you sip again, you glance east, toward the marshy lowlands, the horizon where the trees thin and the songs change. Because while this brew is Finnish at heart, it sings in shared dialects. Tonight, we follow the trail of Sami songs and Baltic echoes, chasing how these frothy birch-born rituals echo beyond borders through windbone and barley. A mainstream fact: the brewing traditions of Bronze Age and early Iron Age Finland overlap significantly with those of nearby Sami, Estonian, and Baltic cultures, from ingredients like birch sap, juniper, and marrow, to the seasonal role of fermentation and the spiritual rituals woven into every sip. You stand now with a horn in hand, watching a brewer stir a second pot with an antler paddle etched in spiral motifs nearly identical to Sami ceremonial ladles still carved today in the far north. The overlap is no coincidence. This was always shared land, a brewing map without borders. One of the brewers begins to hum again, but this song is different, more rhythmic, almost percussive, built of layered syllables and slow ululation. It echoes what Sami joiks do, half chant, half memory, vibrating in the chest more than the ears. She's not singing about the brew. She's singing to it. A quirky tidbit in both Sami and Baltic oral traditions, people once composed songs for specific batches of ale. One joik was said to calm the yeast, another to flavor the foam, and a third to keep the drinkers kind. These songs weren't performed so much as shaped, improvised, and inherited in equal parts. And in Estonia, old farmhouse brewing included spell-like verses recited as the wort cooled often in 3 parts: a wish, a warning, and a welcome. You imagine it now. Wish, let this brew wake strong and deep. Warning, sour, not spill, not swell, not too soon. Welcome. Come, spirits, sit by our fire. Researchers still piece these lines together from surviving fragments, bits of ballad, bits of bone-carved instructions, and a few extremely enthusiastic 19th century travelers who wrote things down after their third horn of forest ale. And what they find again and again is that these songs are as important as the ingredients. You listen now, eyes closed. The tune rises and falls, mixing with the hiss of the fire, the sigh of cooling ash. The brew bubbles a little louder. Not as if it's boiling, no, it's responding. You can feel it, like the foam knows its part in the chorus. Beside you, someone stirs a separate bowl, this one full of honeyed berries and pine soot. A topping, perhaps. A blessing. A reminder that no culture brews alone. That taste like myth travels. One Sami tale speaks of a brew that sings back a horn of ale brewed during the solstice that when held close to the ear echoed with voices. Not language, just sound, as if the forest had passed judgment, and the verdict was melodic. Another tale from Western Estonia tells of a woman who brewed alone in a marsh, whispering names into her ferment as if naming children. When the brew was shared, the guests dreamed the same dreams for 3 nights. You sip now, and while no visions rise just yet, the drink is rich. It carries echoes of everything you've seen, sap, fire, song, bone. But also something unfamiliar, a note from another land folded gently into the flavor. Researchers still debate how far these brewing practices traveled, and whether the similarities across the north were coincidence migration or the inevitable sharing that comes when neighbors trade goods, stories, and the occasional fermented root mistake. But you can taste the overlap. And as the song ends and the cup is passed, you smile. Because the brew doesn't care where it came from. It only cares that you listen. The forest hushes again. Not in fear, just in reverence. A wind rustles through birch leaves, carries a few embers into the air, and disappears. The brewers speak less now. The pot simmers low. And near the edge of the glade, you notice a ring of stones, mossy, sunken, half forgotten. But someone has cleared the center, laid down birch bark, arranged antler fragments, and set a single ceramic shard in the center, darkened by fire, crusted faintly with something that looks suspiciously like the ghost of a very old brew. Tonight, we sit with a question. What do the bones forget to say? A mainstream fact. Not all archaeological finds come with context. Some sites offer just enough to tempt an answer, but never enough to close the book. In Finland, one such site yielded a half-burnt ring of stones, fragments of charred bone, and broken pottery sealed with traces of yeast and fat. But no clear sign of what it was. Ritual brewing burial, or all 3. You step into the ring, careful not to disturb the lichen. It's small, just wide enough for 3 people to sit close. At the center, the shard gleams faintly in the morning light. You kneel, touch the surface. It's cool, brittle. You flip it gently. The underside is blackened. The inside glazed with the thinnest layer of something sticky, ancient, and faintly gold. You don't know what it is, but your nose twitches, and your memory stirs, because it smells just faintly like the brew. A quirky tidbit at one Finnish dig near Lake Päijänne, archaeologists found what they thought was a ritual hearth, only to later realize it might have been a permanent brewing site. The repeated layering of char and residue mixed with bone fragments and fire-blackened sand told a story someone brewed here. Again, and again, and again. But why bones? That's the part researchers still wrestle with. Some say they're table refuse tossed into the fire during a feast. Others argue they're deliberate offerings, ritual additions meant to speak through the brew. Still others wonder if the bones were not just from food animals. You sit with that for a moment. The ring of stones seems too deliberate. The way the bones are arranged, too precise. One has been split marrow hollowed and reassembled with twine and pitch. Another has a shallow hole bored in one end. An instrument. A whistle, a cup. No answers come. You sit in the silence. And then someone joins you, an elder brewer with a face that has seen too many winters to care what archaeologists say. She places a small pouch beside the shard, opens it, and spills out 3 objects. A scrap of moss, brown and dry. A tiny bundle of woven grass. A flat, round pebble, stained faintly with froth. She hums once, then looks at you. You know better than to ask. Instead, she hands you a horn. It's not filled all the way, just a sip. Warm, still fermenting. It tastes stronger now. Earthier. Less birch, more root ash marrow. A brew shaped by things that weren't meant to last, but somehow did. She raises her horn in return. You both drink, and for a moment you feel it. The pull of something deeper. The weight of stories no pot could hold. The ghosts of flavors no one names anymore because they were never meant to be named, just brewed, sipped, and remembered by the body. You set the horn down. The ring of stones watches quietly. You don't speak, because some parts of brewing aren't recipes. They're remains. The brew is nearly finished now. The pot still bubbles, but slowly. The foam has thinned. The scent has shifted, less wild, less sweet, more grounded. Like birch sap exhaling its last sugar sigh and settling into something drinkable, mortal, and wise. The brewers begin to gather wooden cups, horns, bark troughs. You see them brush the rims with herbs, maybe for luck, maybe for taste. Maybe just because it's how it's always been done. And just as the cups begin to fill, someone asks the quietest, most dangerous question. Would you drink it? Tonight we sip from the edge of the unknown. Because yes, some did. A mainstream fact. Over the last 2 decades, a small handful of researchers, experimental archaeologists, brewers, and very brave food historians have attempted to recreate ancient brews using Bronze Age ingredients, techniques, and yes, bone. The results, well, opinions vary. You sip now from a modern horn, not the one from the Ring of Stones. This one was filled by a cheerful, soot-smudged brewer who winked as they handed it over and said, "It's strong, but it doesn't bite unless you insult the pine." You lift it slowly. The scent is still strange resin smoke, faint sweetness, and something metallic, almost like wet bark or old rain. You taste, and it's weirdly good. Not in a tavern pint way. Not crisp, not fizzy, but deep. It has texture. It rolls across your tongue like mossy water leaves behind warmth and lingers like a forest that won't let you go. A quirky tidbit, a few Finnish and Baltic brewers have attempted bone birch beer recreations using reindeer marrow, birch sap, juniper ash, and wild yeast. One described the taste as smoke mead with attitude. Another called it like drinking a Viking's dream about soup. And yes, someone tried aging it. They buried a sealed vessel in a peat bank for 6 months. When it came out, fermented, still sweet, but laced with a sourness that, depending on your optimism, either tasted like history or regret. You watch now as a visiting brewer, a younger one, takes their first sip from a reindeer horn cup. Their eyes widen, then narrow, then they shrug. Better than last time, someone mutters. Still, not everyone drinks. Some brewers sip only the foam. Some never taste their own batch at all. One old woman swears by a rule passed down from her grandmother. If you brew with bone, you pour the first 3 horns to the ground, the 4th to the sky, and the 5th you hold in your hand. But you don't drink it until the moss gives you permission. You're not sure if she's joking. You look down at your drink. It's gone now, and you don't remember finishing it. Researchers still argue over what these modern recreations prove. Can we ever really know the flavor of ancient life? Or are we just guessing, layering myth and memory over recipes that don't quite belong to us? But you know this. You drank it. And it drank you back. Your fingers are warm. Your chest is still. Your thoughts are soft as peat. You sit beside the pot again. The last dregs are settling. The bone has sunk, the froth is gone. And the brewers are quiet now, not because they're tired, but because they're done. The brew is made. It has been tasted. And somewhere beneath moss and ash and birch, the memory of this batch curls up like smoke, waiting for the next song to wake it. The fire is low now, just coals and flickers glowing faintly through a weave of damp twigs. You sit on a log grown smooth with use cup empty in your hand, the taste of sap and smoke still clinging gently to your breath. Around you, the brewing camp begins to soften. No more laughter, no more stirring, no more splashing marrow into bubbling pots. Just stillness. Just the end. The last horn has been passed. The final drops ladled out. The bone ladle is rinsed and hung. The fermentation pot is wiped with moss and left to rest beneath an overturned bark lid. You feel the shift, subtle, but certain the brewing is over. But no one says it aloud. Because in the forest, you don't name endings. You just sit with them. A mainstream fact. Many early brewing cultures ended their ceremonies not with feasting, but with quiet, a slow winding down, as if the brew had taken something from the people who made it and now needed time to give it back. You watch now as the brewers scatter pine needles into the ash bed, marking the fire's rest. A child hums softly, not a brewing song, not this time. Something else, a tune for walking home, for sleep, for the slow turning of moss over old pots. Nearby, a bundle is packed, birch bark cups, dried starter yeast wrapped in grass, the cracked bottom of a pot once thought lucky. The tools leave, but the brew stays behind in memory, in earth, in breath. A quirky tidbit in one old Sami tale. A brew once made in spring was said to echo all the way into winter. If you listened close to your horn, you could hear the trees you tapped and the stories you told as the snow finally returned. You lean forward now. Close your eyes. Rest your hand on the rim of the now cold pot. And listen. The fire fades ember by ember until only a soft red thread remains beneath the ash. The wind hushes through the birch leaves, each one flickering like a sigh, like a secret remembered just before sleep. The final cup rests on its side in the moss, empty now, the foam long vanished, its rim kissed by lichen. You lie back gently. The moss gives. The trees above sway without hurry. Somewhere beyond the clearing, a reindeer bell tinks faintly slow and irregular, like a lullaby hummed by the forest itself. The brewing pot, wiped and cooled, now rests beside a fallen log. A bone ladle lies across its mouth like a seal, a promise that what has begun will ferment through memory. The scent of the brew still lingers in the air, smoke, sap, song, and sleep. The forest settles. No footsteps now, no voices, only the distant creak of branch against branch, and the soft, warm memory of a drink that never left your throat. Somewhere deep beneath the soil, a ring of stones still remembers the last horn lifted, the last stir, the last note sung to a pot full of sap and story. The earth accepts it, the forest hums, and you drift gently into the hush between trees.